The memory crystal glows softly as places his four-fingered hand upon its surface. His chitinous exoskeleton trembles slightly, the pale blue shell reflecting the ambient light of the council chamber. Around him, the high command of the Empire sits in stunned silence, waiting for his testimony about the species they had so foolishly underestimated. "You want to know about the humans," begins, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 nightmares. "You want to understand why our glorious Third Fleet lies scattered across 3-star systems, why Admiral took his own life rather than face another human vessel, why I am the only survivor of the dreadnought Crimson Talon." The crystalline walls of the chamber seem to pulse with his words. Compound eyes, each containing thousands of individual lenses, focus on a distant point as the memories flood back. We had conquered 47 species across the galaxy, 47 civilizations that fell before our superior technology and tactical brilliance. The humans were supposed to be number 48, a young species, barely 300 cycles old in space travel. Their ships were crude metal constructs held together with primitive alloys. Their weapons fired simple kinetic projectiles and basic energy beams. By every metric our scouts provided, they should have surrendered within a solar rotation. A low growl escapes from one of the council members, General, whose own son had perished in the human campaigns. "Continue, Commander. Tell us how such primitives brought our empire to its knees." His mandibles clicked nervously. The first engagement occurred in the 442 system. Our advanced squadron of 12 destroyers encountered a human patrol of 5 vessels. Ship classification indicated they were exploratory craft, lightly armed, minimal crew. Standard protocol demanded we offer surrender terms before engagement. He pauses, his breathing apparatus wheezing softly. Captain of the Knight's Edge opened communications. The human commander was a female, her face bearing strange markings around her eyes. War paint, we learned later. She spoke in their crude language, but our translators captured her meaning clearly. "Unknown vessels, you are in human space. Turn around now and we might let you live." A ripple of incredulous chittering passes through the assembly. Such audacity from an inferior species was beyond comprehension. Captain found their arrogance amusing. He responded with our standard conquest protocol, demanding immediate surrender and compliance with imperial law. The human female's response will haunt me until my final molting. His voice drops to barely above a whisper. She smiled, not the submissive expression of a defeated enemy, but something far more terrifying. She smiled like a predator that had just spotted wounded prey. The memory crystal pulses brighter as delves deeper into his recollections. The human commander spoke again. "Hostile aliens in human space. All vessels, you are weapons free. Show them why we climbed to the top of the food chain." Then their communications cut off. What happened next? Everything we understood about space combat. Instead of forming defensive formations or attempting to flee, the 5 human ships accelerated directly toward our squadron. Not the careful, calculated approach of a military force, but something far more disturbing. They flew like animals charging their prey, with no regard for tactics or self-preservation. Admiral Ra leans forward, her exoskeleton creaking. "Surely your superior firepower ended the engagement quickly." His laugh is hollow and bitter. "Our weapons found their targets immediately. Plasma cannons that could melt through meter-thick battle armor struck the human vessels dead-on. But instead of the expected destruction, something impossible occurred. The human ships continued their charge, trailing atmosphere and debris, their hulls glowing white-hot from our attacks. They should have been dead in space. The lead human vessel, a craft barely 1/10 the size of our destroyers, opened fire while still under bombardment. Their weapons were primitive kinetic cannons, firing metal slugs that our point defense should have easily intercepted. But the humans had done something we never anticipated. They fired in overwhelming volleys, thousands of projectiles per second, creating a wall of metal death that saturated our defensive systems. The council chamber falls deadly quiet. Every present understands the implications of overwhelmed point defense systems. The first human projectiles struck the Knight's Edge along her starboard hull. The damage was minimal initially, but they kept firing, kept targeting the exact same spots. Metal upon metal, each impact weakening our armor incrementally. It was like being attacked by insects, thousands of tiny bites that slowly bled us to death. His breathing becomes more labored as he continues. Then we discovered their true horror. The human ship that had been taking our plasma fire, the one that should have been a drifting hulk, suddenly erupted in a burst of exhaust gases. They had vented their entire atmosphere, their life support, everything, to give their engines maximum thrust. The vessel slammed into the Dawn's light at nearly 15% light speed. The impact was beyond catastrophic. The Dawn's light, a destroyer that had participated in the conquest of the Empire, simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, the next it was an expanding cloud of superheated plasma and metal fragments. But that was not the end. The human pilot had somehow survived the collision, his ship's command section embedded in our destroyer's wreckage, and he was still firing his weapons. The testimony sends visible tremors through several council members. Sacrificial attacks were not unknown in warfare, but continuing to fight after such an impact all logic. The battle continued for another 3 standard hours. Every time we disabled a human vessel, they found new ways to continue fighting. One ship, with its engine section completely destroyed, used its remaining maneuvering thrusters to position itself as a stationary weapons platform. Another, with its hull breached in 17 places, somehow managed to board and capture the destroyer. "Boarded," General interrupts. "How does a crippled vessel board one of our warships?" The human crew, all 12 of them, put on primitive pressure suits and used their ship's remaining torpedoes as improvised personnel carriers. They fired themselves at using magnetic grapples to attach to the hull. Then they began cutting their way inside with handheld energy weapons. Whole body shudders at the memory. Captain ordered security teams to repel the boarders. Our warriors were trained, experienced, and outnumbered the humans 6-1. But the humans fought like nothing we had ever encountered. They moved through our corridors with a fluid violence that seemed impossible. When they ran out of energy weapon charges, they used kinetic firearms. When those were exhausted, they fought with bladed weapons. When their blades broke, they used their hands and teeth. Their teeth, Admiral Ra's voice carries disbelief. Humans are persistence predators, evolved from creatures that hunted by exhausting their prey over vast distances. Their entire physiology is designed for endurance, for continuing when any rational being would stop. They do not know when to quit, because their species survived by never quitting. The memory crystal now glows so brightly that several council members shield their eyes. Seems oblivious to the light, lost in his horrific recollections. The boarding party's leader was the same female who had commanded their patrol. Her pressure suit was damaged, leaking atmosphere, and she had taken multiple plasma burns that should have incapacitated her. Yet she personally led the assault on our bridge. Security recordings show her engaging Captain in personal combat, using nothing but a piece of broken metal as a weapon. Captain was a veteran of 30 campaigns, trained in 7 forms of martial combat, and equipped with full battle armor. The human female was wearing a damaged pressure suit and bleeding from at least 6 wounds. The fight lasted 37 seconds. When it ended, Captain was dead and the human had seized control of our destroyer. The silence in the chamber is absolute. The implications of a single human warrior defeating a captain in personal combat sends waves of fear through the assembled leadership. The captured destroyer was turned against our own formation. The humans somehow managed to activate our weapon systems and began firing on their former targets. But even more terrifying was what they did next. They began broadcasting on all frequencies, speaking in their primitive language, but also transmitting something else. Battle songs. They sang while they died. His voice breaks slightly. The songs were not cries of despair or pleas for mercy. They were celebrations of violence, primal chants that spoke of ancient wars and glorious deaths. The humans sang of their home world's history, of endless conflicts where they had fought not just each other, but their very environment. They sang of ice ages survived and predators conquered, of civilizations that fell and rose again from their own ashes. By the end of the engagement, we had lost 4 destroyers and suffered crippling damage to the remaining 8. The humans lost all 5 of their vessels, but somehow, impossibly, 7 of their crew members survived. When our rescue teams boarded the wreckage of they found these 7 humans unconscious but alive in the command center, having barricaded themselves in and continued fighting until their oxygen ran out. The memory crystal begins to dim as reaches the end of this first encounter. Admiral ordered the survivors taken prisoner for interrogation. This was our first mistake of many. We thought we could learn their weaknesses, understand their tactics, perhaps even break their spirit through proper conditioning. Instead, we learned that humans cannot be broken. During their imprisonment, they continued to resist in ways we had never imagined. They turned their feeding utensils into weapons, their clothing into escape tools, their own bodily functions into methods of sabotage. One of them, a male with strange symbols carved into his skin, managed to reprogram our detention center's environmental systems using nothing but the electrical components from his artificial tooth implants. But most terrifying of all was their effect on our crew. The humans spoke constantly to their guards, not pleading for freedom or offering bribes, but telling stories. Stories of their home world, of their species' history, of the countless wars they had fought and won. They spoke of concepts we had no words for: guerrilla warfare, asymmetric tactics, total war. The council members exchanged troubled glances. The idea of prisoners psychologically affecting their captors was deeply disturbing. The human prisoners began teaching our guards about their concept of never surrender. They explained that in their species' history, the greatest heroes were not those who won easy victories, but those who fought impossible odds and refused to give up. They spoke of ancient human warriors who held mountain passes against overwhelming numbers, of soldiers who fought for days without food or sleep, of entire civilizations that chose extinction over submission. Within 10 cycles, 3 of our detention guards had requested transfers. 2 others had submitted reports questioning the wisdom of continuing hostilities with the human species. The prisoners had not attempted to escape, had not tried to subvert our security, yet somehow they had weaponized their very presence against us. Rises from his position, his legs unsteady after the prolonged testimony. This was only our first encounter with the human species. What followed in subsequent engagements would prove that our initial assessment was not just wrong, but catastrophically naive. The humans we had faced in the 442 system were not their warriors or soldiers. They were explorers, scientists, civilians who had volunteered for peaceful survey missions. The assembled council sits in stunned horror as the implications sink in. If human civilians could inflict such damage, what would their actual military forces be capable of? The human female who had captured our destroyer, the one who had defeated Captain in single combat, her specialty was studying alien plant life. The male who had sabotaged our detention center was a geological surveyor. The youngest member of their group, who had piloted one of the improvised torpedo boarding attempts, was an apprentice engineer on her first space assignment. Before our attack, none of them had ever fired a weapon in anger or participated in military combat. Yet when faced with hostile aliens threatening their territory, they transformed themselves into something our empire had never encountered. Warriors who viewed death as preferable to defeat, soldiers who fought with the accumulated rage of millions of years of evolution. The memory crystal finally dims to darkness, but words continue to echo in the chamber. If you wish to understand why our empire trembles at the mention of human space, if you want to comprehend why Admiral chose death over facing them again, you must first accept a fundamental truth. We are not the apex predators we believed ourselves to be. Humans are. And what we encountered in the 442 system was only the beginning. 3 solar cycles had passed since the incident at 442, and found himself standing before the High Command once again. The memory crystal in his hands felt heavier now, weighted with experiences that had fundamentally altered his understanding of warfare itself. The assembled council members looked older, their exoskeletons bearing new stress fractures, their compound eyes dim with the burden of impossible decisions. "You summon me to continue my testimony," begins, his voice carrying none of the military crispness it once possessed. "You want to know about the human response to our initial contact. You want to understand how a species we had dismissed as primitive managed to turn the might of the Empire into a cautionary tale whispered in the darkest corners of galactic space." Admiral Ra shifts uncomfortably in her command throne. Intelligence reports suggest the humans have been mobilizing their entire civilization. Our deep space reconnaissance has detected massive military buildups across their territory. How is this possible? Their industrial capacity should be insufficient for such rapid expansion. His laugh is bitter and hollow. "You still think like Admiral. You assume that military buildup requires traditional infrastructure, standardized production facilities, centralized command structures. The humans have taught us that there are other ways to wage war." The memory crystal begins its familiar glow as activates the next sequence of his experiences. 42 cycles after 442, Admiral received intelligence that human civilian vessels had been spotted in the system, apparently constructing some form of space station. The Admiral decided this was an opportunity to demonstrate superiority while dealing with what appeared to be an isolated human outpost. The strike force consisted of 23 destroyers and the battlecruiser Eternal Dominion. Our intelligence indicated the human facility was defended by perhaps 6 vessels of the same primitive design we had encountered previously. Admiral expected a decisive victory that would discourage further human expansion. General leans forward, his mandibles clicking anxiously. What did your forces actually encounter? The system had been transformed into something our military analysts had never seen before. The humans had not built a single space station, but rather an entire network of interconnected structures, each one appearing to serve multiple functions simultaneously. What our scouts had identified as construction platforms were actually mobile weapons emplacements, disguised to look like civilian infrastructure. Pauses, his breathing apparatus working harder as the memories intensify. But the true horror was not in their deception, but in their efficiency. The humans had somehow managed to construct this facility using materials harvested from asteroids and comets within the system itself. They had turned the entire system into a fortress, using nothing but salvaged rock and ice. The initial engagement began according to standard doctrine. Admiral ordered our destroyers to form attack formations and demand surrender from the human commander. The response came not from a single source, but from dozens of communication nodes scattered throughout the system. Every human facility, every mobile platform, every asteroid mining operation began broadcasting simultaneously. The message was simple and terrifying. This is human space. You killed our people at 442. We remember everything. The council chamber falls silent except for the soft humming of life support systems. Continues, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. What followed was not a battle in any sense that our military doctrine recognizes. The humans did not engage our fleet directly. Instead, they began broadcasting detailed tactical analyses of our previous engagement, describing every weakness they had observed in our ships, our formations, our decision-making processes. They had studied our tactics, learned our patterns, and identified vulnerabilities we did not even know we possessed. The first attacks came from the asteroid field itself. What we had assumed were natural objects began accelerating toward our formation under their own power. The humans had hollowed out dozens of asteroids, fitted them with engines and guidance systems, and turned them into massive kinetic weapons. Each one was essentially a guided meteor, carrying the mass of a small moon and moving at velocities that made intercept nearly impossible. Admiral Ra's exoskeleton creaks as she shifts uncomfortably. Surely your point defense systems could handle such crude projectiles. That is what Admiral believed. He ordered all destroyers to engage the incoming asteroids with maximum firepower. Our plasma cannons struck target after target, but the results were not what we expected. Instead of destroying the asteroids, our weapons merely broke them apart, creating clouds of high-velocity debris that continued on their original trajectories. His compound eyes seemed to lose focus as he relives the memory. The humans had planned for this. They had calculated that our standard response would be to destroy the incoming threats, and they had designed their weapons to be more dangerous when broken apart. Instead of 23 large impacts, we suddenly faced thousands of smaller projectiles, each one still carrying enough kinetic energy to penetrate our hull armor. The Knight's Vengeance took the first major hit. A fragment of destroyed asteroid, no larger than a warrior, punched through her primary hull and detonated the forward plasma conduits. The explosion tore through 17 decks before the emergency containment systems could activate, but this was only the beginning. The memory crystal pulses brighter as delves deeper into the nightmare. While our fleet was dealing with the asteroid bombardment, the humans activated their true weapon, information warfare. Every communication channel, every data transmission, every sensor array on our ships was suddenly flooded with human broadcasts. These were not random transmissions or attempts at jamming. The humans were broadcasting their own version of what had happened at 442, complete with tactical recordings, survivor testimonies, and detailed analyses of every mistake we had made. They were telling their story to our own crews, explaining how 12 human civilians had defeated an entire destroyer squadron. General's mandibles snap shut in agitation. Psychological warfare is a recognized tactic, but surely our communication security prevented any real damage. You still do not understand, replies. The humans were not trying to damage our equipment or overwhelm our systems. They were teaching our crews about human military history. They broadcast stories of ancient human wars, conflicts where outnumbered forces had defeated superior enemies through sheer determination and tactical innovation. Our warriors learned about something called the Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 human warriors held a mountain pass against an army of hundreds of thousands. They heard about the siege of Bostonia, where surrounded human soldiers refused surrender despite overwhelming odds. They discovered tales of human resistance movements that had fought occupying armies for decades, never accepting defeat even when their homes were destroyed and their families scattered. The assembled council members exchange alarmed glances. The concept of troops learning about enemy propaganda during active combat was deeply disturbing. But most terrifying of all were the humans' technical broadcasts. They began transmitting detailed blueprints of their improvised weapons, explanations of their tactical decisions, and theoretical discussions of how to maximize damage using minimal resources. They were literally teaching our own crews how to fight more effectively. His voice becomes strained as he continues. 3 destroyers reported crew members requesting permission to study the human transmissions for intelligence purposes. 2 others experienced what their commanders described as unusual philosophical discussions among their warrior castes. The humans were weaponizing curiosity itself. The actual combat continued for 18 standard hours. Our fleet's superior firepower eventually destroyed most of the human installations, but the cost was catastrophic. 7 destroyers were lost to the asteroid bombardment, and the battlecruiser Eternal Dominion suffered damage that would require complete reconstruction. Yet when our forces finally secured the system, they discovered something that all military logic. The human facility had never been intended as a permanent installation. Hidden among the wreckage were escape pods and transport vessels that had evacuated the entire civilian population hours before our attack began. Admiral Ra rises from her throne, her legs trembling with either age or fear. You mean the humans knew we were coming? Not only did they know, they had planned for it. The entire facility was an elaborate trap designed to inflict maximum damage on any force while preserving human lives. Every structure, every weapon, every piece of infrastructure had been built as expendable components in a larger strategy. The implications settle over the Council like a death shroud. The humans had sacrificed an entire star system to damage a single fleet, demonstrating a level of strategic thinking that bordered on the incomprehensible. But the true horror was revealed during our examination of the captured human records. The facility was not unique. Intelligence files indicated that similar installations were under construction in dozens of other systems, each one tailored to exploit different vulnerabilities in our standard tactics. His breathing becomes labored as he approaches the most disturbing part of his testimony. The humans had been studying us since first contact. Every engagement, every transmission, every piece of debris we left behind was analyzed, and they had created detailed psychological profiles of our command structure, tactical manuals based on our behavioral patterns, and strategic plans that assumed we would continue to underestimate their capabilities. We discovered that the human commander at 442, the who had defeated Captain, had not died in the engagement as we believed. She had survived and was leading the human military response. Her name was Dr. Sarah, and she had become something our intelligence services had no classification for. A civilian who had voluntarily transformed herself into a strategic weapons specialist. The memory crystal dims slightly as reaches a temporary pause in his narrative. Doctor's psychological profile made for disturbing reading. Before our attack, she had been dedicated to peaceful exploration, with published research on interspecies cooperation and conflict resolution. But the death of her colleagues had triggered something in her that our could not comprehend. She had not simply become angry or vengeful. Instead, she had systematically studied every aspect of culture, military doctrine, and historical behavior. She learned our language, memorized our tactical preferences, and identified weaknesses in our strategic thinking that we ourselves had never recognized. General interrupts, his voice carrying disbelief. A single human civilian became a strategic threat to the entire military. Doctor had done something no commander would consider. She had shared all of her knowledge freely with every human military organization, scientific institution, and civilian government. Instead of hoarding intelligence for personal advancement, she had created a distributed network of expertise that made every human facility a potential threat. The human response to our aggression was not centralized military mobilization, but rather the systematic education of their entire species in anti-warfare. Every human citizen became a potential intelligence analyst. Every human facility became a possible military asset. Every human encounter became an opportunity to gather data about our weaknesses. Exoskeleton trembles as he reaches the conclusion of this phase of his testimony. Admiral received reports that human civilian vessels were approaching 17 different systems simultaneously. Not warships or military transports, but merchant vessels, exploration craft, and research stations. Each one was broadcasting the same message. We come in peace. We wish to establish diplomatic relations. We have gifts for your people. The Admiral recognized this as either a genuine peace offering or the prelude to a coordinated attack. Given what we had learned about human tactical thinking, he chose to treat it as the latter. This decision would prove to be the final mistake of his military career. The memory crystal pulses once more before dimming to a soft glow. What the humans delivered to our systems was not weapons or soldiers, but something far more dangerous: hope. Their gifts were complete libraries of human culture, science, and philosophy, freely shared with any citizen who wished to access them. Our people learned about human concepts of individual rights, democratic governance, and social mobility based on merit rather than birth caste. They discovered human art, music, and literature that spoke of possibilities our rigidly hierarchical society had never allowed them to imagine. Within 30 cycles, the Empire was facing something more dangerous than military defeat: internal revolution inspired by human ideas. The humans had weaponized enlightenment itself. The council chamber erupts in alarmed chittering as the implications become clear. An empire built on strict social hierarchy and absolute obedience could not survive exposure to concepts of individual freedom and democratic participation. This was when Admiral made his final decision. Rather than face the complete collapse of civilization, he chose to launch a desperate preemptive strike against the human home world itself. The entire remaining fleet would assault Earth directly, hoping to end the war before human influence could spread further through our territory. What we discovered at Earth would prove that our understanding of human capabilities had still been catastrophically insufficient. But that encounter belongs to another chapter of this testimony, one that I am not certain our minds can fully comprehend. Places the memory crystal carefully on the council table, its soft glow reflecting off his trembling exoskeleton. If you wish to continue, I will share the final phase of our war with humanity. But I warn you, what follows will challenge every assumption you hold about the nature of warfare, civilization, and survival itself. The council chamber has grown cold during the extended testimony and notices that several members have quietly departed. Those who remain sit with the rigid posture of beings confronting truths that threaten to shatter their fundamental worldview. The memory crystal in his hands pulses weakly, as if the device itself struggles to contain the final chapter of his experiences. You have heard how the humans transformed from victims to tactical innovators, begins, his voice carrying the weight of absolute exhaustion. You understand how they weaponized information, hope, and even their own deaths. But nothing in our previous encounters prepared us for what we discovered when Admiral led the final assault against their home world. Admiral Ra, now the only senior officer remaining in the chamber, leans forward with desperate intensity. Tell us about Earth. Tell us why our greatest military leader chose death over reporting his failure. The memory crystal flares to brilliant luminescence, forcing several council members to shield their eyes. Seems oblivious to the light, his consciousness fully immersed in the nightmare he must relive. The approach to the Sol system appeared routine according to our long-range sensors. Standard defensive installations, a modest fleet of human vessels, orbital platforms around their primary world. Admiral commanded the largest force ever assembled: 47 battle cruisers, 130 destroyers, and the flagship dreadnought Cosmic Devastation. Nearly 200 ships carrying the accumulated military might of our empire. Our intelligence suggested that humanity's total naval capacity consisted of perhaps 30 vessels of primitive construction. Admiral expected the assault to be concluded within 12 standard hours. Instead, We discovered that human defensive strategy operates on principles our military doctrine had never encountered. Pauses, his breathing apparatus cycling rapidly. The first indication of something unusual was the complete absence of human military challenges as we entered their system. No demands for identification, no surrender ultimatums, no defensive positioning. Their ships simply maintained their positions around Earth and its moon, broadcasting what appeared to be routine civilian communications. Admiral interpreted this as evidence of either human surrender or a poorly organized defensive response. He ordered our fleet to proceed directly to Earth for orbital bombardment, expecting minimal resistance. This was our first critical misunderstanding of human defensive psychology. General, his compound eyes reflecting increasing agitation, interrupts. Surely your overwhelming numerical superiority made human resistance irrelevant. Numbers only matter if both sides are playing the same game, replies. The humans had long since abandoned any pretense of conventional space warfare. What we encountered around Earth was not a military defense, but rather the logical endpoint of everything they had learned about fighting superior forces. The memory crystal pulses brighter as delves into the most traumatic portion of his experiences. Our first indication of the true nature of Earth's defenses came when we began detecting massive energy signatures from the planet's surface, not from military installations or weapons platforms, but from what appeared to be civilian population centers. The humans had done something that violated every principle of civilized warfare. They had militarized their entire population. Every human city had become a fortress, every civilian facility had been converted into a weapons manufacturing center, every human citizen had been trained as a potential combatant. But this was not simple civilian militarization. The humans had created something our military analysts had no classification for, a distributed weapons system spanning an entire planetary biosphere. Every human settlement was connected to every other through communication networks that allowed real-time coordination of defensive responses across continental distances. Admiral Ra's exoskeleton creaks as she shifts uncomfortably. You mean their entire species had become a single military unit? Worse than that, the humans had transformed their home world into a living weapon that could adapt and respond to threats in real time. When our fleet approached Earth's orbital space, every human facility simultaneously began broadcasting detailed analyses of our ships, our formations, our likely tactical responses, and optimal counter-strategies. His voice becomes strained as he continues. But the broadcasts were not directed at us. The humans were coordinating among themselves, sharing information and tactical updates faster than our intelligence services could intercept and analyze. They had turned their entire planetary communication network into a military command system operated by 4 billion individual processing units. The first direct engagement occurred when Admiral ordered the Stellar Dominion to move within bombardment range of Earth's primary continent. The response was unlike anything in our tactical databases. Instead of launching missiles or energy weapons from fixed installations, the humans began firing projectiles from what appeared to be civilian industrial facilities. These were not military weapons in any conventional sense. The humans had converted mining equipment into kinetic launchers, repurposed construction machinery into missile platforms, and transformed manufacturing plants into ammunition factories. Every tool their civilization used for peaceful purposes had been redesigned as a potential weapon system. The memory crystal now glows so intensely that the chamber's lighting systems automatically dim in response. Seems unaware of the change, lost in recollections that have haunted him for cycles. The projectiles themselves classification. Some were conventional kinetic rounds, others appeared to be modified industrial equipment, and still others were clearly improvised weapons constructed from civilian materials. But all of them shared one characteristic. They had been designed by beings who understood that quantity could overcome quality if applied correctly. The Stellar Dominion found itself under bombardment from 17 different surface installations, each one firing continuously at rates that suggested automated manufacturing systems had been repurposed as weapons factories. Captain attempted to return fire, but discovered that targeting civilian facilities created its own problems. General leans forward anxiously. What kind of problems? The humans had anticipated that we would hesitate to destroy civilian targets. Every surface installation was clearly marked as a school, hospital, cultural center, or residential area. Our rules of engagement prohibited attacking non-military facilities, but the humans had systematically eliminated the distinction between civilian and military infrastructure. Captain requested permission to engage targets that were clearly attacking his ship, but appeared to be operated by human children. Admiral permission, ordering the fleet to maintain position while attempting to identify legitimate military targets. This delay allowed the humans to implement their primary defensive strategy. His breathing becomes increasingly labored as he approaches the core of his testimony. What we had failed to understand was that the surface bombardment was merely a distraction. The real human defense was already in motion, and it operated on a scale we had never imagined possible. Human civilian vessels throughout the Sol system began accelerating toward our fleet. Not warships or military transports, but cargo haulers, research stations, orbital habitats, and even spacecraft that appeared to be purely recreational. Hundreds of vessels, each one broadcasting civilian identification codes and distress signals. Admiral faced an impossible tactical situation. Rules of engagement prohibited firing on civilian vessels, but sensors indicated that many of these craft were on collision courses with our ships. Some were broadcasting surrender messages, others were requesting emergency assistance, and still others appeared to be evacuating human civilians from the combat zone. The Admiral ordered our fleet to maintain defensive positions while attempting to establish communication with the approaching civilian vessels. This was exactly what the humans had planned for. Every moment we spent trying to identify threats gave them additional time to position their assets for maximum effect. The memory crystal begins to flicker as if the device itself is struggling with the intensity of the recorded experiences. Continues, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The first civilian vessel to reach our fleet was a mining transport that appeared to be carrying refugee families fleeing the combat zone. The ship broadcast continuous requests for safe passage and medical assistance for injured children. Admiral ordered the Righteous Fury to provide humanitarian aid according to galactic warfare conventions. When our boarding teams reached the human vessel, they discovered that it was indeed carrying civilians, including human younglings. But they also found something that redefined our understanding of human tactical thinking. The refugees were not fleeing the battle, they were participating in it. Every human civilian, from the youngest child to the most elderly adult, was actively gathering intelligence on our boarding procedures, weapon configurations, and defensive protocols. They asked innocent questions about our equipment, expressed curiosity about our ship designs, and requested detailed explanations of our safety procedures. Admiral Ra's mandibles click in confusion. They were using their own children as intelligence assets. Not using them, corrects. The children were volunteering. Human younglings as young as 6 or 7 standard years had been trained to recognize different types of military equipment and ask questions that would reveal tactical weaknesses. They turned curiosity itself into a weapon. But this was only the beginning. The refugee vessel was transmitting everything our boarding teams said or did to the entire human defensive network. Every technical detail, every security procedure, every operational protocol was being analyzed and distributed to hundreds of other human facilities in real time. The assembled council members sit in stunned silence as the implications become clear. The humans had weaponized helplessness itself, turning the galaxy's humanitarian protection protocols against their enemies. The situation deteriorated rapidly as more civilian vessels reached our fleet. Each one required humanitarian assistance according to warfare conventions. Each one contained genuine refugees, including children and elderly humans, and each one systematically gathered intelligence that compromised our operational security. Admiral found himself in a strategic nightmare. He could not fire on civilian vessels without violating every principle of civilized warfare, but allowing them to approach gave the humans unprecedented access to detailed information about our fleet capabilities. Exoskeleton trembles violently as he reaches the climax of his testimony. The human strategy reached its culmination when their primary defensive installation finally revealed itself. What we had assumed was their orbital space station was actually something far more terrifying. A weapons platform constructed from the combined resources of their entire solar system. The structure was enormous, easily the size of one of our battle cruisers, but it had not appeared on any of our reconnaissance scans because it was not a single construction. The humans had somehow linked dozens of separate facilities into a coordinated weapons system that spanned the space between Earth and its moon. When this installation activated, our tactical displays registered energy signatures that exceeded anything in our weapons databases. The humans had not built a defensive platform. They had converted their entire home system into a single massive weapon capable of engaging multiple targets simultaneously. The first salvo struck 6 of our destroyers before our point defense systems could even register the incoming fire. The projectiles were not conventional weapons, but rather entire human facilities that had been launched as kinetic weapons. Space stations, orbital habitats, even industrial complexes had been converted into guided projectiles and fired at our fleet. Admiral Ra rises from her throne, her legs trembling with either exhaustion or terror. How did they achieve such destructive capability with primitive technology? They had weaponized sacrifice itself, replies. Every projectile contained human crews who guided their improvised weapons to target while knowing they would not survive the impact. Families volunteered to serve as ammunition, parents and children working together to ensure accurate targeting of our vessels. But the true horror was not in their willingness to die, but in their efficiency at killing. Each human-guided projectile struck with precision that our automated systems could not achieve. They targeted specific weak points in our hull armor, aimed for critical systems rather than attempting general damage, and coordinated their impacts to overwhelm our repair capabilities. The memory crystal flickers more rapidly now, as if the recording device cannot maintain stability while processing such traumatic experiences. Its voice becomes increasingly strained. The battle lasted 14 hours and cost us 37 ships, including 2 battle cruisers. But we never actually fought the human military. Every weapon, every tactic, every casualty we inflicted was against human civilians who had voluntarily transformed themselves into weapons of war. Admiral finally ordered a full retreat when our casualty reports indicated that we had killed over 12,000 human non-combatants without encountering a single enemy soldier. The humans had made it impossible to achieve military victory without committing genocide against their civilian population. But even the retreat became another nightmare. Human civilian vessels followed our fleet out of their system, continuing to broadcast requests for humanitarian assistance while systematically gathering intelligence on our damaged ships and evacuation procedures. His breathing apparatus cycles frantically as he approaches the conclusion of his testimony. The final horror came when we analyzed the communication intercepts from the battle. The humans had been broadcasting continuous updates to every human facility in the galaxy. Not military intelligence or tactical data, but something far more dangerous: inspiration. Human colonies in distant systems had watched their home world's defense in real time. They had seen 12,000 civilians voluntarily sacrifice themselves to protect their species, witnessed families working together to guide weapons against our fleet, observed children contributing to strategic planning that had defeated the largest military force in history. Admiral realized that our victory had only made the situation worse. We had not defeated human military forces. We had created martyrs whose example would inspire human resistance across the galaxy for generations to come. The memory crystal suddenly dims to complete darkness, as if the device has finally exhausted itself. Sits in silence for several moments before continuing in the fatting chamber lighting. 3 cycles after the Earth assault, Admiral received reports that human civilian vessels were approaching territory from 18 different directions. Not invasion fleets or military expeditions, but refugee convoys carrying survivors from the Earth battle. Each convoy was broadcasting detailed recordings of our assault on their home world, including visual documentation of forces firing on human children, destroying civilian hospitals, and targeting non-military facilities. They were not seeking revenge or demanding reparations. They were simply sharing their story with anyone willing to listen. The effect on public opinion was catastrophic. Our own citizens began questioning the morality of a war that required killing enemy children to achieve victory. Military recruitment declined as potential warriors refused to serve in campaigns against civilian populations. Colonial governors reported increasing unrest as local populations demanded explanations for our conduct at Earth. Admiral Ross slumps in her throne, the weight of implications crushing her resolve. How did it end? Admiral met with Dr. Sarah aboard a neutral vessel in the system. She was no longer the we had first encountered, but she was not a military commander either. The humans had created something our political science had no classification for, a civilian leader who commanded absolute loyalty through moral authority rather than formal rank. The meeting lasted 6 hours. Doctor presented a simple proposition. The Empire could continue its expansion in any direction except toward human space, and humanity would make no attempt to interfere with our internal affairs or territorial ambitions. In exchange, humans would share their technological innovations, cultural achievements, and scientific discoveries freely with any citizens who wished to access them. They would not demand reparations for our attacks, tribute for their defensive victory, or territorial concessions from our empire. General's mandibles snapped shut in disbelief. They offered unconditional peace after defeating our entire fleet. Doctor explained human strategic thinking with a single statement that Admiral recorded for posterity. We don't want to rule you. We just want to be left alone to pursue our own development. But if you force us to fight, we will show you why apex predators rarely travel in herds. Admiral accepted her terms immediately. He understood that humanity possessed capabilities that made traditional conquest impossible. They had weaponized concepts our military doctrine could not counter: voluntary sacrifice, distributed decision-making, moral authority, and evolutionary adaptability. Rises slowly from his position, his movements careful and deliberate. 3 days after signing the peace treaty, Admiral retired to his private chambers and activated a plasma grenade. His final message to High Command consisted of a single sentence: "I have seen the future of warfare, and we are not prepared for it." The council chamber falls into absolute silence, broken only by the soft humming of life support systems. Places the now-dark memory crystal on the table and steps back. You asked me to explain why our glorious empire trembles at the mention of human space. The answer is simple. We discovered that there are forms of strength that cannot be conquered, types of victory that cannot be achieved, and enemies who become more dangerous when they are defeated. Humanity has taught us that a species' greatest weapon is not its technology or its numbers, but its willingness to sacrifice everything for principles it considers more important than survival itself. They have shown us that civilian populations can become military assets, that defeat can be transformed into inspiration, and that the greatest victories sometimes belong to those who refuse to surrender even in death. The humans are not warriors in any sense we understand. They are something far more terrifying, ordinary people who become extraordinary when their survival is threatened. And now they know that such threats exist in the galaxy. Moves toward the chamber exit, his testimony finally complete. If you seek to understand humanity's true nature, remember this: they are the only species we have encountered that becomes more dangerous when it is cornered, more united when it is attacked, and more innovative when it faces impossible odds. We have awakened something that was sleeping peacefully in the galactic periphery. The question that will define the future of the Empire is not whether we can defeat humanity in battle, but whether we can survive in a galaxy where human ideas continue to spread. They have given us peace, but they have also given us a choice: evolve or become extinct. And after witnessing what happened to those who chose to fight them, I believe the decision should be obvious. The chamber door seals behind with a soft hiss, leaving the remaining council members alone with the implications of his testimony. In the darkness, only the faint glow of emergency lighting illuminates their faces as they contemplate a future shaped by the knowledge that they are no longer the apex predators they once believed themselves to be.